by all accounts, is a statewide legend in Montana as Touchdown Tommy. So, like everybody, I mean, I've got an uncle who lives in Bozeman. He was a professor at Montana State, and sometimes he forgets that I cover the FCS because he'll text me and go, "Hey, you watching this game? What do you think? Montana State's winning," and I'll be like, "Oh, I cover this for a living, man. I'm kind of aware." I'm like, "Tell me more about this Touchdown Tommy kid, though. I didn't know anything about this guy."
Right. It's like Steve Jobs' mother calling and saying, "What do you think about computers?"
It's exactly, it's kind of like that. And he's like, "Well, everybody knows about Tommy Milot in Montana. He's out of Butte. Both programs wanted him, and I don't know. Can you imagine having the missing component show up from the freshman class in the playoffs?"
Right. I mean, shades of Tua Tagovailoa, right? I mean,
yes, very similar, very
right. Right. I mean, it's funny, and I mean, I sort of joked about the quarterback by committee thing they had going on there. I think was it 4 different quarterbacks started for them this year?
Yeah, they had a bunch. Yeah, and it wasn't always because of injuries. It was just because of subpar play, and that's been the big thing, and that's why. Well, I mean, when you're trying to like prognosticate this stuff, you take everything that's led up to this point. Maybe you sprinkle a little history into it, and you look at this and you go, well, how could you ever have factored this into the equation? Because this kid has completely changed their offense.
Yep.
And you thought, okay, well, in their first round, the first game, of course, they had a bye because they were a seed, but their first playoff game, he really didn't have to throw the ball. He ran it. And he was exceptional. I think he rushed almost 200 yards. This is, again, touchdown Tommy.
60-something or something.
He was way up there. Yeah. He didn't have to throw a whole lot. So the next thing you're thinking is, okay, they're gonna do the run game and defense thing with Sam Houston, which Sam Houston is kind of a program that likes to score points, but they've played better defense the last year or two. And you thought, gosh, okay, well, this is going to be tough. It's not like the Sam Houston teams of 5 years ago that would finesse, and then they'd run a JMU or NSU and get slaughtered,
Right.
And they let Tommy throw a little more, and it turns out he's pretty damn good at that too.
Yes, right. He seems to have a pretty good arm, and I mean, I'm not going to call him Case Cookus yet, but you saw some.
Case Cookus was good.
Oh my gosh. But you saw flashes, right, of a guy who can kill you with whichever way that he has to. Sometimes a dual threat guy is a guy who's not quite great at both things. No, this guy's a true dual threat. He can run all over you or throw all over you.
So he's been the factor, and he is the reason why they could very well be in Frisco in a couple weeks. I didn't pick that, but
me neither.
But I could certainly see it happening. So you're right. I mean, there's certainly nothing to take away from that game. It just doesn't have the recent, Clash of the Titans history that JMU and NDSU has had either in Texas or in Fargo. It's never been played in Harrisonburg. But
right.
So both of them are awesome. Just awesome. So.
And speaking of quarterbacks, since we're at least touching upon some quarterbacks, I'm going to move over to the quote-unquote main event and talk a little bit about Cole Johnson. I don't understand why he isn't being discussed more. He's big. He's a terrific athlete. He has a great arm. Like, what is it I'm missing? Like, why aren't people talking about this guy more? Why is he at the Tropical Bowl and not, at least maybe not the senior, but East-West Shrine? I don't understand.
I know.
Yeah, I don't get it.
Yeah, that makes no sense. And while the two major candidates, for the Walter Payton Award, which is of course the Heisman for the FCS, made a lot of sense. It's still kind of like, why wasn't he talked about at the same level? I mean, he ended up throwing 39 touchdowns and only had 2 picks this year.
Right. His numbers are insane.
Yeah, they're
3,584 or something yards passing.
Yeah.
And a very good runner. He has a couple of games where he's had 60, 70 yards rushing, even after you subtract out sack yardage. He's pretty complete. I mean, I can't find a lot of things where they say, oh, he's bad at. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, I think he's going to play at the next level. If not as a starter, then at least as a backup. And I think he'll have a nice little run.
Yeah. I don't know what it is. But Brian Shore dealt with the same thing. He very similar situations. I think. When Ben DiNucci came, he had transferred, quote unquote, down from Pitt, and it started against some really big name programs in his life, Penn State or I think maybe ACC teams that are really strong. So like he kind of had a little more flash to him, and it took him a year to really get rocking, and then he had a really good second year and got drafted and played a little bit for the Cowboys.
Right.
Brian Shore, it was always kind of like, well, he's a that whole description, system quarterback. He's very efficient. I can never tell, is that a knock on a guy or is that a compliment?
I mean, well, I mean, Joe Montana said, I'm a system quarterback, right?
Yeah.
So I guess it depends on who's saying it, but many of the greatest quarterbacks of all time were system quarterbacks. Drew Brees is a quote unquote system quarterback, and I don't know if there's been 7 or 8 better ever to do it. So
yeah.
So I guess it depends on. Some people say it as a knock, but I don't think it's a knock. I think they're just saying that you aren't John Elway or something. I guess is what they're trying to imply. You aren't 6'4", 6'5", 6'3", 6. You don't look like the mental picture. You're not 220. You don't have a cannon for an arm. I guess that's what they're trying to get.
Yeah, that's. I get that. That's probably exactly what it is. Because Brian didn't necessarily have a cannon for an arm, but and yes, he was extremely efficient, and he was kind of quiet-spoken guy. If you got to know him a little bit, and Cole, I haven't got to know him as well. I've talked to him a little bit, but he's not a loudmouth, that's for sure. I don't know what. I don't know. Maybe you have to be flashy because, like, Ben DiNucci was a little flashy.
He had a little
some swagger.
Yeah, right, a little bit of that. Yeah, he did.
And he's a great guy too. He really was a great guy.
Tough as nails and
super
competitive.
Yeah, it's funny though. Here's a guy that transferred from Pitt, a P5, who actually started games early in his career as an underclassman at the P5 level. And the JMU fans were more frustrated with him than they've been with anybody in the years because they loved Vad Lee. So
right. They're two very different kinds of quarterbacks. Yeah.
Very much, but Vad was just so freaking awesome,
dynamic,
a guy, great player, great guy, and made that known. And Brian was almost borderline kind of shy when you dealt with him, but just the nicest guy in the world, and Cole too. But yeah, Ben ultimately great guy. Look at these quarterbacks that JMU has gotten over the years.
They've done well.
They have, and they've recruited well. And some of the guys, like I'm trying to remember, they got Mr. Football out of South Carolina at Rock Hill Northwestern High, which is a powerhouse there, and he never even played. He's gone.
Right.
They got
couldn't get on the field.
Yeah, they got a South Carolina transfer a number of years. He never saw the field. So not only can they attract talent, they make a great determination of who fits us best. Mike Houston did, and Kurt now, and obviously that has bode well. So it's. Yeah, that's. I mean,
and Mickey before that. I mean, they've done well. They've done a good job hiring coaches too. I mean, they have.
Yeah,
right?
They have.
They get things right.
It's a sexy job. I mean, who wouldn't want that job?
Right.
And now they are moving into the realm that a lot of coaches want to be at, which is the FCS. Personally, I don't get it.
Well, I mean, the answer is cha-ching. I mean, I'm assuming, right? I mean, it has to be.
It is.
It has to.
And also, and when you think about like what Coastal Carolina has done,
Yep,
and Liberty has done, and then you go
Appalachian
back
State
to
stepped right in and won. I think they won 8 games or 7 games their first year.
Yeah, you start to understand if a program thinks they're going to be that strong, then okay, I kind of get it because yes, money. Obviously, the money is the first thing, but also just the national brand name. But it's not like James Madison and North Dakota State don't have a national brand name.
Right. I mean, we got a game day from Fargo once. I don't think we've ever done one from Harrisburg, but
there's been two each, and then there's been 2 in Harrisonburg in 15 and 17, and there's been 2 in Fargo back-to-back years in 13 and 14, and South Dakota State had it last year.
Yep.
I couldn't believe, by the way, that the Brawl of the Wild up in Montana didn't get.
Well, they originally had planned to go, and they swapped it out for a Big Ten game, right?
That's right. They were talking about it. But, getting game day, on a side note, late in the year is always going to be difficult for an FCS game. It's just hard to imagine that happening. But,
hard to compete.
But, yeah. So.
Oh, excellent. I believe we have a super special guest. Is that Will?
Super special or just special?
Yes. So, Will, I don't know if do you know Brian McLaughlin? If not, you should.
Only by reputation, I guess is the right way to say it.
Oh, dear Lord.
How's it going?
Hey, Will, how are you, sir?
Yeah. I strongly urge you to if you aren't already, follow him, and he's got great stuff. I want to touch a little bit back on the quote-unquote undercard game. Another player that I don't understand why people don't talk about more, because people do talk about Pierre Strong. He's being talked about as a guy who's going to be drafted sometime probably from the middle of the 5th round to maybe the 7th, but probably before. Right. A guy I don't hear people talking about, I don't understand why, is Lance McCutchen, the receiver at Montana State.
Yeah.
What am I missing? He seems to have really good hands. He seems to be a good route runner. He has size. Yeah. And he may not be blazing fast, but I see him running away from people.
Yeah, it's so funny when it comes to the draft and guys from the FCS that it's hard for me to think of a better way to put it than it's kind of like one strike and you're out. You kind of and a lot of times that strike happens when you're done with your FCS career and you're doing the lead up work in the spring. That seems to be when players' reputations really spike, unless you, of course, or Trey Lance or Nasir Adderley or, those guys. Jeremy Chin a couple years ago at Southern Illinois. Those guys got drafted with Cooper Kupp, obviously.
Right.
But the majority of the guys that really shoot through the roof do it around the time they get invited to an all-star game, like you said earlier, Bill. That helps a ton.
Everything.
That, and then, if you somehow get into the combine, that already pretty much tells you that you're definitely, there. But your pro days, how many times have we seen a guy, speaking of one strike and you're out, go into his pro day and, Sam Houston, a school that has a lot of athletes, great athletes. They had their pro day a couple of years ago, and P.J. Hall was just an absolute terror as a defensive lineman. And P.J. is a bowling ball, defensive tackle, whatever.
Yep.
And he goes and he does 40 reps.
Yes.
Runs a 4.8.
I remember. Yep.
And remember the quickness in the drills. I mean, he was
like a linebacker. He was moving almost like a linebacker.
Exactly, but he's a big dude, and he gets taken, of course, by the Raiders, I think, that year, pretty early.
Yes.
You got to think, if he doesn't have that pro day, regardless of the fact he blocked like 20 kicks in his career, if you remember,
his productivity was off the charts.
He was insane.
Yes.
Yeah, he's a sack man. he's going to block kicks for you on special teams. He loves blocks punts, blocks extra points. It doesn't matter. He's like, tell me what to block. Guys like that really ascend in the spring, and so that could be the thing with Lance. You're right. Pierre is a known quantity. My guess is he probably got on the radar earlier in his career. Like, if you remember, he had that really good start against North Dakota State 2 years ago when the game day was in Brookings, and Dallas got Goddard. I think everybody was talking about Dallas at South Dakota State going into his senior year, and he was a known quantity as a tight end. So it just depends, but pretty much any of these studs, again, they're gonna get at least one chance, and when that happens. Sometimes you wish you could have two or three, but you're going to get at least one chance to be seen. And if you blow up, you blow up. And even being a high priority free agent is no insult to these guys. It's a big
because
deal.
Because it's not even guaranteed that you'll get that.
Right. And a lot of the guys have flourished, especially if they're willing to really take special teams seriously or be a third down back style, a guy who can catch and block and run the ball if he's a running back, all that stuff. He can play more than one position on the O-line, and FCS guys embrace that stuff. I'm sure Lance will get a chance. It's just,
I would think also wide receiver is a position that's just so crazy deep right now for years.
It is. You're right.
You're just in a sea of wide receivers, and so somebody has to take a real special interest in you to keep pushing you towards the top. It's when you're an FCS guy, I would think.
Well, and also, okay, you think about the drafted positions. What's the most coveted thing? Which obviously means what's the rarest thing you have available? It's athletic defensive linemen. And, but it's just like you said, Will, it seems like there's a million great receivers out there. There's a million great running backs, and that reduces the value, like you said. And that is also, I've always thought, that's probably the biggest difference between the FBS and FCS is obviously, what are you going to have obviously on the lines, but especially on the defensive line. There's going to be good quarterbacks at the FCS level. There's going to be amazing athletic wide receivers that are just as good as the guys playing in the FBS. Maybe their growth spurt ended at 19, not 17. You know what I mean?
Right.
And the draft works the same way. I mean, Clemson and Alabama and Ohio State they're going to first and foremost go after that 5-star defensive end or defensive tackle that just don't grow on trees.
Right.
And unfortunately for wide receivers and running backs, they grow on trees.
Right. Yes.
You know?
Correct.
So.
It seems like they do anyway.
Right.
Right.
Hey, Bill, just quickly, you guys inspired me with things you were saying there with two questions. But my first is, are you thinking of the Montana State game as the undercard game? Oh my goodness.
Well, I mean, I'm not saying I think of it as, I'm saying it's being treated as if it were the undercard game because so much ink has been spilled talking about the James Madison North Dakota State game.
Yeah. And kind of right.
I think Montana State and South Dakota State are the two best teams in FCS right now, which is fun.
And you might be right.
That's why I think that is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, JMU lost to Nova. North Dakota State lost to the team that's playing Montana State. So I can't totally disagree with that. I just think that JMU and NDSU, they get here a lot. They're used to this.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
A little more star power attached to them.
Yeah, and they just crank it in the postseason. I mean, NDSU has rarely run the table in their 10 years. You know, they usually drop one in the Missouri Valley.
Right.
JMU,
which is understandable because
it is.
I mean, it's hard. That's a tough conference.
Well, almost every single team in the Missouri Valley has beaten an FBS team in the last 5 years.
Right.
Think about it. You know, Northern Iowa's beaten Iowa State.
Yep.
North Dakota State, everybody's scared of them. They won't even schedule them now.
Right.
The last one they played was Iowa, and they beat them. They beat Kirk Ferentz, and South Dakota State beat Colorado State this year, and they've beaten Kansas in the last 5-6 years, and Illinois State's beaten Northwestern. Southern Illinois beat UMass, which is that really an FBS?
Well, yeah, UMass. I never understood. You talk about teams that don't make sense leaving the FCS. Yeah, UMass being an FBS program is. I mean, once again, I'm sure they have their reasons, and I'm assuming those reasons were monetary. But boy, oh boy, oof.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Yeah, that didn't work out real well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was pitching a bowl game between UMass and New Hampshire to determine the worst team in the FBS. I think that might have been a big seller. The other thing you guys inspired me, you were talking about special teams being a ticket for FCS players. Did you bring up Trey Anderson at all right now?
Well, not yet. We're coming to him. I was going to talk about a couple more offensive players and then spend the rest of the time on defense because, defense. But yes, since you brought him up, we can definitely discuss him. But yeah, I mean, he is.
I wondered if. Go ahead.
No, I mean, once again, he's sort of a known quantity. Like Bruce Feldman has talked about it, right? I mean, that's when you know you're going to be okay. He's going to be invited to the combine, and he's going to test extremely well. So, yeah, but yes, please, I would love to hear what Brian has to say about it.
We're talking about Troy Anderson?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, he's a Swiss Army knife. Yeah, and it's funny you brought up special teams. I don't know that I have a memory of him playing special teams at Montana State, but if there's a kid who would do it, it's him.
Right.
He's played quarterback for him and been successful.
Yep.
Even throws decently. Can you imagine in this day and age that if you had an emergency at quarterback, you just throw your linebacker in there? I mean, it's crazy, but that's what
I'm saying. I think I think he's the captain of your special teams as his floor, and your
absolutely. He's a jack of all trades, and he's a tough-nosed kid. And Bill, you and I were just talking about about Tommy Melott, touchdown Tommy, being an absolute legend in Montana. Well, my uncle was telling me about Troy Anderson before he ever went to MSU, because they used to do the Parade All-American teams, and he's like best player in Montana is this kid named Troy Anderson. And so I
maybe the best player that state has produced in a while.
Yeah. Who was that kid that went to Washington and went to the NFL though, out of Bozeman? He actually went with what's his face from Boise State. I'm having a brain fart on a million names here, but they've had a couple out of the state of Montana, but it is rare to have a really big name be potentially mentioned as a draft pick.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's definitely going to be drafted. I mean, unless he has the world's worst pro day, and even then, still might get. But I mean, he's not going to have the world's worst pro day. He's a very good athlete. Yeah,
he is. So that's that talk is definitely ramped up. He's proven that he's a leader. He's got a lot of those intangibles, and he's just a ball player. I don't know if you call him a throwback because he can play so many different positions.
To Iron Man football, yes, he can call it.
Yeah, apparently he is, and they love him in Bozeman. I mean, and he's a big part of what's going on here. He's a big part of if they go to Frisco, Troy's a monster. So but that's. Yeah, certainly he will be a topical conversation for the next 6 months, big time. Yeah.
Yep. And I do expect him to, like I said, not get to the combine, but also have a good day at the combine. William, did you have another question?
I was going to say Will Disley, Brock Hoyle. I'm trying to prompt your memory with names.
Yeah, Will Disley. Will Disley is the one. He was out of Bozeman High, and again, my uncle's a diehard football guy, and he was Will, if you didn't hear me, he was a professor at Montana State, so he had a lot of these guys in his classes. And so, the Bozeman Hawks, that's where all my cousins went. And Will came from Bozeman High, and he was so good, he wasn't even looking at the FCS level, which I'm sure the Montana schools wish Will had. And he first committed to Boise State, and then when Coach ended up at UW, he went with Coach to UW, and obviously ended up in the league. So that's probably the most recent example. And I had him on the great All-American team because the guy, and I remember my uncle saying, and he's been a fan all his life and has never missed Montana State games. He said that this kid out of Bozeman High was another one of those Swiss Army knives, jack of all trades type players, just did everything and was just a beast at everything. And Troy was the player that reminded him the most of Will. Wow. When he was coming up. So
excellent. I wanted to touch. You mentioned offensive and defensive line. Because they just had the hardest thing to come by, and especially athletic ones. And it's it's probably the place where we see the most difference between FCS and FBS football. And North Dakota State generally has what I would call at least mid-level FBS kind of offensive and defensive line in terms of size and technique also. I mean, these guys are extremely well coached. But a couple of key pieces. Well, I guess you can give me an update. I know they got hurt in the last game they played against the Buccaneers. And shout out to the Buccaneers. Just a few years, well, to me, it seems like years after restarting their program. What was it, 2006 when they restarted?
2000. Well, they took a 13-year hiatus, if you remember.
All too well, because I had a friend who played there and was brokenhearted when they shut down their program.
I couldn't believe that because I grew up outside of Greenville, South Carolina, and Furman played them every year in the SoCon, and Furman had good teams at that time, but ETSU was pretty decent too. And I'd be honest with you, doing other things and moving to Florida and in my career doing other things, I didn't even know that they had dropped football. And when I took the gig at Hero, and I'm not there anymore, by the way, Bill. Long story, but they brought the program back the year that I started covering FCS, and Carl Torbush, was heading it up, who used to be the head coach at North Carolina,
right?
And I remember
long-time defensive coordinator for. Seems like 40 different programs, but yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he got it off the ground, and then, they bring in Randy Sanders, who, obviously just retired last week, but he continued that as the quarterback whisperer, coming from, being at Florida State with Jameis Winston and coaching Peyton Manning and coaching Tim Couch at Kentucky. So they've had a good coach, all of the first, 8 or 9 seasons of getting it restarted. And that program just learned how to win close games. I mean, that was the same thing in 2018 that they were doing, was the same template they were using to succeed this year. I mean, when it was close, they always won. I mean, that's just good coaching and a resilient kid. You knew they were overmatched in what they had to do last weekend, but they are scrappy when they have to play a team like NDSU. They do not lay down and just fold.
I was very impressed by that team, their effort, and the talent level. I mean, obviously not commensurate with NDSU, but that's a solid program. It's not just effort. Like, they've got some guys.
They do, and they recruit really well. And even though they're in Eastern Tennessee, which is not necessarily, a hotbed within 100 miles of your campus, they're not far from Atlanta. We all know the kind of talent they have around Atlanta. It's one of the best areas in the country.
Right.
They can go into Virginia and even have
Kentucky, Virginia, even a little bit into parts of Ohio and Indiana a little bit as well.
Exactly. It's not far, and we all know the Hampton Roads area in Virginia is a talent hotbed. So if you get a kid or two out of there, and ETSU comes down here to Florida too. I'm in the Tampa Bay area, and they're not an unknown quantity down here.
Right.
Any team that can come down here and get a kid is certainly not unknown. So you're right. They really did have. Well, they do have some talent, and every year I can tell you from doing recruiting, every year they get a guy that makes your head spin.
Right.
Karan DeLentz is one of them. The year he picked them, and he may not have been the superstar of the team, but he was a contributor all 4 years, and he'll get a look with the NFL. Man, when they landed him as a freshman, not a transfer, a freshman.
You're right.
It was like, whoa! I mean, he was like a 3-star guy. He had lots of FBS options, and he straight up picked ETSU. That was the kind of kid they were attracting. So, they didn't back into that spot last weekend. They really earned it. Yeah.
I was definitely impressed with. Once again, the effort was definitely there, but I mean, like I said, the thing that got me was, yes, overmatched, but not. It wasn't like they didn't belong on the same field. You could tell this is a solid program. But in that game, and once again, maybe you have an update to give us, but Nash Jensen and Jalen Sundell both got hurt. Do you know anything about if they'll be available? And I'm assuming they probably will, but do you know if they might be hampered?
I don't have any specifics about that. It might be, seeing as though we're less than an hour from kickoff, it might be something I can look up and just see if they've kind of announced. Maybe when I, for once, shut up, I can look that up while you and Will are talking.
Soon, but not yet.
The one thing, though, that differentiates NDSU from everybody else is they build depth on the line, and the way they do it is what they did Wednesday for early signing day. On average, when you have 62 scholarships available, you would think that do the math, about 15 to 20 kids a year, depending on how many left early or transferred, and maybe you have a couple more scholarships, maybe you have a few less. That's attrition. But you never would expect a program to bring in 31 guys in the early class. There's a reason for that, and it's because they get walk-ons who have scholarship offers, maybe from D2s, but they get walk-ons and they stockpile linemen. And so, yes, the injuries, that you're talking about, certainly, losing your center is not, you don't want
not
that.
Ideal. Yeah.
No, but if there's a program that can rebound from it better than anybody at that position, it's clearly NDSU. Their two deep is, their twos are starting for 90% of the FCS teams.
Right. And they would definitely start for UMass. Okay, no more gratuitous shots at UMass. Sorry. But continue.
Yeah. Well, and by the way, think of what NDSU would do to UMass.
Oh.
Think of what NDSU would do to the weakest third of the P5s.
Oh, they run right through them. We know this because they beat good teams, right? We've seen them beat good teams. So, it would be unpleasant to see what they would do to these bottom feeders. That's why when people always say level of competition, I'm like, well, would Vanderbilt be NDSU? You know what I mean?
Hell no.
That's what I'm saying. They're in the SEC.
Not.
But
I'll tell you, man, I'm a Florida Gator grad. Bill, you might know that. And I'm not so sure this year's Florida team would have beaten NDSU.
Well, I'll say this about this year's Florida team, and once again, I don't have the inside information, but they seem to have problems that had nothing to do with talent. And I'll just leave it at that.
They imploded, and that's something that you get a lot of arrogance and ego, and the fans' expectations are out of whack with realistic.
Right.
I know I went to school with these guys, and they make a lot of sense on a day-to-day basis, but when it comes to Gator football, they don't, there's a reason fan is short for fanatics, and fanatics is like another word for clinically insane.
Yes, correct.
That's Gators for you. But you're right. All that turmoil within a program like a blue blood SEC program can sometimes work against you. And, that's one of the things that's so cool about the FCS level is the egos and the arrogance and the me, and I'm going to the NFL the minute I can, and it doesn't exist here.
Right.
I mean, Bill, when you talk to these kids and they say, I am here to get a degree.
Right. And
I don't want to. Yes, they mean it. I don't want to stick a finger down my throat and puke. Listening to it, knowing it's not true. I mean, they all say that at the FBS level, but none of them, not none of them, that's generalizing, but a lot of them don't mean it because they've been told of the second coming of Christ all their lives. And, and that's not the case with the FCS. So even with the superpower, like NDSU or JMU, these guys are pretty grounded, and they don't implode because they don't have that level of arrogance. Yeah. And the coaches are arrogant too. I mean, they're part of the problem. So
as the old Italian saying goes, a fish rots from the head down. I'll touch on this very briefly, and then I'll steer us right back to the playoffs real quick. And then you can sort of give us sort of key matchups and who you think might win. I remember when Matty Mock transferred down to Eastern Kentucky and was just telling anyone who listened he was going to just walk on there, show up and start. Benny Coney never gave that job up. I followed it. I kept track of it. And Benny himself was a transfer, right? Benny had transferred down.
Yes, he was from Cincinnati.
Right. Correct. But the difference is Benny had his head screwed on right. That'd be the difference.
Benny did. You are so right. He was a great recruit. Great kid. Yeah,
he was.
Yeah. And Matty was not.
Once again, I'll leave it at that. I'm not here to trash anybody, but I've heard things.
Matt, everything you heard is true, and I dealt with him one-on-one for the parade teams. And Matty was good, and he knew he was good, and his dad knew he was good. His dad was the coach in his high school in Ohio.
Of course.
And Matty didn't, everything didn't go his way at the FBS level. He transfers to Eastern Kentucky, and one of the I asked every single transfer I ever talked to is, okay, you've started games. Ben DiNucci's a good example of this, except he really wasn't out of control with that. But you go, man, Ben, you started games on the road in front of 100,000 people.
Yep.
And that's a bitch. That's hard, and you come to a smaller school, but really, honestly, what you see between the hash marks, how does it compare? And he is just one of many that just went. He goes, this is just as hard. You can't go into this thinking that FCS is this lower, especially when you're talking about the upper echelon, the upper 35, 40 schools.
Right.
They're really good too. They're just not as deep. That's it.
Correct.
I mean,
the starters from any of those top tier programs, if you drop them in Conference USA or Sun Belt or in some cases maybe Mountain West, they would be right there and being competitive. They'd be competitive. They would be winning 6-7 games immediately.
And that's why the game. And Bill, that's why the games are so good many times.
Yep.
Into the fourth quarter. And what does that mean when a team beats you in the fourth quarter? It means you probably got worn down.
Yep.
And you did need depth. And not only does the FBS level, especially P5 level, have more talent in its depth chart, it has more players because it has 23 more scholarships.
Yes.
So, it's not that Natty Mock was going against inferior competition when he came to Eastern Kentucky. It's that he just there were some other good players there too. And Benny had an attitude that fit this level better. He was humble. He was a great kid in recruiting. I remember him when I was at the Sporting News. I love talking to Benny.
Yeah.
You could just tell his head was on right, and you saw what happened. And that there, it's like we see sometimes with SEC recruits that end up in the Ohio Valley Conference. That happens a lot. In Jacksonville State, I'm just going to say it. Jacksonville State takes a lot of those kids, and a lot of them do not pan out. Now, granted, they left the SEC schools because of it could be an off the field problem.
Sometimes it wasn't talent. It was the
it's
anyway.
attitude. Yeah. You're right. And that's why they're there. But a lot of times it's playing time. So they're already kind of have an attitude about playing time, and then they go to Jacksonville State, they can't get on the field, and then they just self-destruct. So. That's a great example of arrogance getting the best of you. If you've been reading your clippings or I guess we don't have newspaper clippings anymore. You're reading your Twitter feed too much or whatever.
Right, exactly.
Whatever.
So let's just touch on the games and what you think will be the keys to those games. We'll start with not at all an undercard. No, I wasn't implying that. I was saying it's being treated like an undercard. Well,
right.
But let's start with that game. And once again, these might be the two best teams, and maybe the best game. But take me through those. How you think that South Dakota State and Montana State game will play out and why?
Ooh. Well, we touched on earlier that the biggest question mark about Montana State all year was the quarterback position, and miraculously this freshman shows up out of nowhere and has become, an icon. just like that. It only took 3 or 4 weeks. He got some playing time against the Grizz in the Brawl of the Wild, but they got hammered in that game. But
they're a different team now.
They are. Did you know that he only threw 4 passes coming into that game?
No.
All in his whole career. So, he had not really played. We're not talking about mop-up duty in 5 or 6 games and blowout. He really hadn't played that much. And so he has made this a completely different thing because, in middle of the year, we're looking at Montana State's schedule, and because of the way they rotate the schedule in the Big Sky, they missed out on playing a lot of the upper echelon of the Big Sky. And so it was really hard sometimes to go, okay, well, where do they really stack up nationally when they're missing some of the hardest games that potentially could have been on their schedule? And they also, they had Wyoming on the ropes in their FBS game. They could have won that game.
Yep.
They're really good. They're good on defense. If you love statistics, they've had a good sound defense all year. They're around the top 10, in all the categories: passing defense, rushing defense, and scoring defense. They're only allowing 13 points a game. That's the number 2 scoring defense in the country, behind Big Shot, North Dakota State. It's funny how much they all have that in common when you get to the semifinals, So Montana State's tough, but South Dakota State, it was interesting when we were filling out brackets before, the playoffs started. And a lot of people, I talked to the guys at Fan Nation a lot, and Bill, I know you've at least probably seen them. They're great. They know their stuff. They're actually even though they're diehard fans of one school, they collectively, they're actually almost like a media outlet. And they ran the bracket contest, and the first thing they said after they were all in is, my goodness, folks, you will not believe how popular South Dakota State is a pick, even though they're unseeded. And they earned, don't get me wrong, they earned their non-seed. They lost to 3 teams they should not have lost to, but they were valid games,
Right.
And honestly, if South Dakota doesn't beat them on that Hail Mary, by the way, South Dakota State is a seed. and they don't play week 1.
Right.
But a lot of people saw this happening, that they would make a run like this. They are very balanced. We don't know for sure about Pierre Strong because of the injury last week.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that too. Okay, got it.
Yeah, but Isaiah, but he's not, as far as I've seen, and I look every day, as far as I've seen, there has been no official word on yes or no on that, but he did miss the second half last week. So there's, that to consider, but Isaiah is, Isaiah scored 3 touchdowns against Villanova.
He may, and this, I don't say this rashly, he may end up, when it's all said and done, be an even better prospect NFL-wise.
Possibly.
I don't know if he's a better football player, but I think he's faster than Pierre.
He is.
Can I take a question?
Yeah, Will.
Just about Isaiah Davis, because I'm of the opinion Isaiah Davis is ultimately a better prospect than Pierre Strong, hard as it is to say. But in the game before, not last week when Pierre Strong got hurt, but the previous game, if I'm not mistaken, they had Isaiah Davis in crunch time in that game, even when Pierre Strong was dressed and healthy.
Huh. Yeah, I mean that's and I did the podcast with the South Dakota State fan guys who are really the best podcast of that fan base, and he was a big discussion topic because he missed 7 or 8 games this year due to injuries.
I think week 4 or something he got hurt. And was out until just a couple weeks ago. With the shoulder.
He was pretty nicked up, and so the question was. How good will he be? But boy, it sure is good to get him back. And that was coming into the playoffs. Yeah. And now, it's really perfect because, boy, South Dakota State over the years has had this kind of stuff happen to them at the wrong times a lot. So, so that's a big question. Obviously, the game is going to be played in Bozeman. It is a sellout. Place is going to be rocking. Everything's far away out in the west, but at least South Dakota State's not having to fly to Pennsylvania or the San Francisco Bay Area, for this trip. It's a little bit shorter, which means maybe more fans could get in there. We'll see. But we all know it'll be predominantly Cat fans tomorrow. So, those are all the things. They're pretty much all 4 teams that are alive in the semis now. We're talking about the usual coach cliches of great defense, great run game, efficient passing
Well, except James Madison, which normally has a really good run game.
Well, they've had injuries too. Percy got hurt, and then this the young man. I remember him so well because I was actually at Harrisonburg when he broke Latrell Palmer when he broke the long run against Villanova. When my brother and I actually went to that game, and my brother took the pictures of him breaking away. He basically put the game away, and he wasn't even. I think he was 3rd on the depth chart then. So that's how good Palmer is. So,
and they had injured the offensive line as well this year.
And they had very young offensive line aside from Liam, of course. Liam is another draft prospect.
Yes,
and,
he is.
And they've had kind of a weird situation at center, but Liam had played center for a long time, so that I think he moved back from left tackle, which of course the premier position, back to center to help the group. But so you're right. It's not perfect for JMU, but in general, they've still run to set up the pass.
Yes.
And I think that's why the Cole Johnsons and the Brian Shores don't get the attention of, a Cole Kelly down in southeastern Louisiana throwing 60 times a game. So anyways, so Montana State, South Dakota State, who are we kidding? It's a toss-up.
Yeah.
It's a great matchup. And I don't have a problem using the word undercard at all in this, but it certainly isn't because this is a bad game.
Right, exactly.
It's just how monstrous this rivalry between a team in Virginia, of all places, and North Dakota has become.
Yeah, in just a handful of years. Do you want to make a pick on the? It's not really a title fight, I guess, because it's not for the title, but it feels like a title fight. How do you see that game playing out? And then I'll let you run because you got to go.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I put Anthony Knockreiner and I, who do our weekly podcast. We worked together since he was, by the way, a radio show host. He had the only statewide daily sports talk show in the state of Montana. He's from Florida. He's back here. So we do a national podcast, and we announced our picks. And I've got this being the fourth time I've had to pick a JMU NDSU game.
Right.
And I'm 1-2 in those because I've always gone with JMU until today. I think NDSU is going to win by 3, and it's going to be one of those games where it's a play in the fourth quarter. It could be a pick. It could be a breakaway, play. Maybe one special teams mistake. Even though these two programs are good at special teams, that's another thing. And then with the MSU South Dakota State game, I picked South Dakota State, but Anthony Knockreiner picked Montana State by 3. He, by the way, Knock is an interesting guy to have on. Let's say if MSU makes the national title game, Bill, because he covered Tommy Melott in high school.
Oh.
He knows the mom and dad. I mean, he talks to him after every game. So like Knock has a perspective that very few people around the country could possibly have.
If you do me a great favor of getting me his contact information, I will do
Absolutely,
just that.
I will. Yeah, he said the kid is really special. So he feels very strongly about MSU being at home, that they have fixed or answered the question at quarterback, and I feel like South Dakota State, even with maybe Pierre not playing, though he could, is just playing lights out right now. So I picked South Dakota State by 3.
Well, on your way out the door, tell people where they can find your work, where they can follow you, and what stuff you're working on.
Yeah, Bill. So I did Hero. Just to give you 2 seconds, Hero Sports was purchased by BetMGM. You may have heard, okay. And Sam and I were employed with BetMGM, and I'm not going to get into details because I don't like being a negative guy.
Yeah, please don't.
But it didn't have anything to do with Sam.
Got it.
Sam and I are still, and I didn't like BetMGM at all. And so I did it in August, and I decided I'm going to try to tie together as much as I can to get right back up on the platform before I lose a lot of people. I've lost like 500-600 Twitter followers off my account, and I'm like, man, really worked hard to build this. So almost immediately, thanks to Craig Haley, he got me set up with Athlon. I was able to take over his column with the national top 10 games each week and give my picks. And also the FCS Fans Nation gave me a platform where I could write more creative stuff that Athlon didn't necessarily need. But ultimately, and then we did the podcast, which we're probably a matter of hours away from doing our 3,000th download in 14 episodes. We're very, very proud of the growth of that. But to be bluntly honest with you, Hero Sports, Sam and I were averaging about 1,000 a week by the time I left. So we had really grown that audience from scratch in the beginning. And so we got the podcast, and the idea, at least conceptually, is I will launch a new site in 2022 and reach back out to my contacts and really, really build something, because I spent 6 years building the FCS beat with Hero, only to kind of have it be taken out from under me.
Right.
And so I'm just not going to. First of all, the Hero Sports crowd were wonderful. I mean, they allowed me to do that. We weren't exactly pouring in money off of it, but it was slowly building, but it wasn't building fast enough.
Got it.
And so they sold us, and then BetMGM had a different way of looking at us and where Hero fit in. So I never understood why they bought Hero, because they haven't exactly done the same thing we were doing with it. Anyway, so that's what all had happened, and I haven't been with them in a year, basically. But yeah, that's what's going on, and just trying to stay on top of it as much as possible while juggling other contracts, and gonna put a lot into it this year. So I appreciate you letting me yap.
Well, I will I will always want to have you yap, but also I'm going to want updates as things.
Oh yeah,
go on,
sure.
I'm going to want to make sure the world of people there is a world of people that care about this stuff, and I want to make sure they know about it. Will, did you have a final question, remark, or promo that you wanted to give before we close out?
Oh, I just don't want Brian to get away without saying thank you so much for all the great insight. And it's wonderful to have anybody to follow on Twitter or on podcasts that talk FCS football, because passion of mine, as Bill knows. And, I hope that you continue to have a venue that will really support you to be able to do that. So thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will follow your account and get to know you a little better, Will. And mine is at Brian McWriter on Twitter. So let's follow each other and keep in touch. Okay.
I already followed you.
Okay. Yeah.
And Bill, I'm sure Bill will have us on the draft show together. And then we'll
it.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm having both of you back.
100 plus.
Yes.
Cool.
Yes, I promise that. And I'll be interviewing you, Brian, as you get closer to the launching of what you're launching, because I'll be writing something for Sports about that.
Yeah, definitely. And we're aiming for around May 1st. So, but there may be more of a soft launch of what we're doing, but really hit it hard once we start previewing the fall and just seeing if there's a way to monetize it, because hey, we're all grown men. We gotta
we have people to feed. Yes,
yeah, we got people to support and bills to pay, and it is fun to do something you love to do, but you also have to be realistic. So there's a lot of things to figure out, but I think that I've always thought that since starting this in 2015. That the FCS level from a national collective is as big a collective fan base as in Alabama. It is. And the numbers don't lie. The attendance numbers don't lie. And if you could ever kind of have them all want to come to your place, that you may be on to something.
Right. Jackson State said attendance. I mean, once again, I'm not going to take another shot at UMass. I'll pick somebody else to pick on this time. But
UConn. How about
but
UConn?
Jack's right. But heck, right. Connecticut wishes they had the number of people in stands that Jackson State had this year.
Jackson State. That's a whole other awesome.
We'll do a whole other show on that. I promise you.
Because that recruiting situation is what they have done, by pulling in Dion like that.
Yep.
And now, we see Hugh Jackson going to Grambling. We saw Eddie George going to Tennessee State, even though they're OVC team.
Yep.
I mean, that's a hell of a template, and it is so cool to see, young African American players want to go change things at an HBCU.
Right, and
how
Maker,
badass is
on the
that?
basketball side, Maker went to Howard, right? I mean, it's a fluke when one happens, right? And it's a pattern when you get to two. You get to about 4 or 5, it's a trend.
It is, and it's obviously working. And yes, a side effect is you're going to bring in revenue. There's no question. If you're selling 3 times as many tickets as Jackson State is now, pulling in 50,000+ after. Being in the 12, 13 range average, unless it was a big rivalry, you're obviously bringing a lot more money, a lot more branding and prestige. I just hope Dion stays around. That's the biggest thing.
We're all hoping. We're all hoping this isn't a rental. We're hoping it's.
I hope he's not thinking Florida State, but I bet you he is.
Well, and we'll see, because Florida State might. What's the word I'm looking for? Might play themselves out of contention for Deion Sanders if this continues.
About to say. Yeah, you're right. That's cool stuff.
It is. So I promise we'll do a whole recruiting. We just don't have time tonight, obviously, but I promise we'll do a recruiting thing, and we'll definitely talk Jackson State. I want to thank Will Masiak, who is at Accidental Zen on Twitter.
Yep.
And what's your other one? Is it Velvet Films? What's your other one, Will?
Well, we have one on Twitter, but
okay. Well, there it is. Will at Sills in.
Show on podcast everywhere.
Yep, and of course at Brian MacWriter, Brian McLaughlin, two of the best, and I'm thrilled to have both of you on. I'll be having you both on for something else in the very near future. I want to thank everyone for paying attention to the things that we care about, and we'll do this again soon. Gentlemen, thank you so much. I give you back the rest of your lives, or at least the rest of this evening, and once again, I thank you both for your time, your talent, and your attention.
Thank you, Bill. Appreciate you having me on, and let's go all enjoy this game coming up.
Yes, sir. We're about to do just that.
JMU, NDSU. It's going to be a fun one. Slobber knocker.
Yes. Yes, indeed. Thank you again, and have a wonderful evening. Yes.